Hey guys, so in this video you and I are going to talk a little bit about CSS modules. So let's get into it. Now, CSS modules, why am I going to talk to you about CSS modules? Well, I am going to talk to you about CSS modules because the other day I made a video in response to a user request where I have virtually made the bold statement or made a personal life choice to choose BEM, or rather block element modifier, as opposed to using CSS modules. And this viewer, who is an absolute peach, told me this thing here. He said that he had a lot of successes using CSS modules, and he gave me some code examples of how he approached this and some conventions that he'd been following as opposed to using BEM. And then he asked me for a concrete example of when I feel that BEM makes more sense than CSS modules, for example. So I made a video about it, and I stated that I've had issues with CSS modules as one of the reasons as to why I'm not picking it as my first choice. And then he had an amazing follow-up question where he asked the question, okay, cool, could you give us an example of when you've had issues with CSS modules? And that's what I'm going to tell you about. I'm going to tell you what I told him. Now, for this to make any type of sense to you, we're going to have to define two things. First and foremost, you need, or rather the statement that I made to him was virtually that the issue I've had is that when you have a non-deterministic class name, sometimes that's a very bad thing. The beauty of CSS modules is that you get a unique hash on your class name, which guarantees that you can use any name, any ambiguous, there's no ambiguity. I'm not even going to try to say that word. There is no ambiguity. I got it in the end there. Anywho, so that's the beauty of it. But that's also the danger for two use cases. Twice in my career, I've had an issue so far with this type of approach. And let me tell you how. So at my previous job, I was working on one of the world's largest content, it's virtually a massive content management system. And in essence, the issue was, or rather the way that it worked for a specific part of the system was that we, as the maintainers of the code base, or the main product basically, provided the pages that the different markets or the different vendors or whatever, our customers basically. The way that it worked was that we provided a base set of styles, and these other markets and these companies and these clients of ours had the option of customizing the stuff that we actually put on the page. They could put in some extra CSS styles, they could tweak things if they wanted to, they could even put their own JavaScript on the page. Now, I know, for all the seniors out there, it is literally as horrible as you probably suspect it was. It was horrible. And the best part is that, hey, if the customer breaks something because they don't know what they're doing, it's still your fault somehow, or you're the one who's going to have to investigate and fix it. Now, for the juniors out there, you may not understand what the issue with all of this is, but for those of you who've ever had to support theming or anything of that nature, you will probably guess that the way that this was solved, in order for the customer to be able to basically do any type of styling they wanted, the way, or there are several ways, but the way that we did it was that we had a CSS style sheet that we provided as a base layer. And then the users would themselves declare their own CSS styles. And we would simply append that file after our own file so that they could overwrite all our CSS. And that's the beauty of the cascade, right? Awesome. However, if you think about it, what if we had used CSS modules? Because if we had used CSS modules, odds are that the hashes that would be produced would have been non-deterministic. Ergo, the users themselves could not have trusted that the style sheets that they made are going to stay the same over time. Because as soon as we on our end start changing things or making modifications, they would have to update their stuff as well. That's why in this scenario, it's very important for you to be sure that the style names that you declare, the class names and selectors and all that stuff, are going to stay the same, because you have a restriction in the environment. That's what I told my subscriber. Anywho, apart from that, there's another scenario where this is a little bit of an issue to have non-deterministic styles or class names virtually. It's not a big thing in any way, but if you do acceptance testing, for example, now acceptance testing is basically that you have an automated system that goes to your page and looks for elements on the page and interacts with the page automatically and simulates a user in essence. And it's extremely effective to regression test and make sure that your system is working or that the page is working as intended. However, that gets very tricky if you don't know what the selectors are going to be on the page every time you push a new change to the system. Because if the change has affected the hashes that CSS modules are outputting for you, all your tests are going to break. Now there are ways to mitigate this. This is just one other reason I could say that this is maybe not the best thing in the world. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use CSS modules. It depends on your use case. As I said, like, I'm extremely opinionated. I like BEM because, as I've said in a previous video, like, it does everything I need it to do, and it doesn't have any of the limitations of CSS modules. It doesn't have any of the it doesn't really have the benefit of it either in the same way. But hey, trades, subjective opinions. That's what I'm all about here. Anywho, the way that you could have solved it, if I'm being completely honest with the whole, and this is actually what I'm trying to pitch on because my company, for some mysterious reason, some very, very suave and subtle political agenda type of person has incepted the project manager and convinced her that automated testing is a good idea. I don't know who it is, but he's fairly sneaky. Anywho, the way that I'm trying to promote the usage of acceptance testing is, instead of hooking into CSS selectors, which is because we are using CSS modules, as I said, that's a problem for us because we can't trust that the hash is going to be the same every time. So what you do is that you take custom attributes, like the data attributes that you can put on HTML elements, and you do something like data-acceptance test or data-test or something like that, and then you give that an ID of some sort, and then I know you shouldn't put testing code in production code, but this time I think it makes sense. And that way you can actually grab the element and make your test work all nice like. These are some of the ways that you can get around it. But for the most part, as I've mentioned, I think the biggest argument is that CSS modules is more complex in general than BEM, and that's basically it. BEM works for everything, and that's why I love it. Hopefully this was useful to you. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use CSS modules. I'm just saying that it's not the perfect fit for every project. So think about it before you make that choice. Have a great day.